Political Capital is brought to you by Uber Canada. Learn how Uber and Mad Canada are reducing impaired driving at uber.com/home soon.
CHEK Podcasts.
Hey everyone, and welcome to Political Capital, your source for all the latest in BC politics. I'm your host, Rob Shaw. Thank you so much for joining us. And also, thank you to those who've been listening to Political Capital daily, in your ear holes every morning, in your pod box as well, with morning updates on BC politics. We're going to bring in the pod squad. You've heard them on the Daily Show here and there, but this is Political Capital Prime, where we all get together and figure out what is going on in BC politics, walk you through everything. Jeff Ferrier, Jillian Oliver, Angelo Isidorou are here like they are every week. Thank you for coming in. And we are going to start with a fascinating story. There's so many ways we can get into this one. OneBC leader and Vancouver Quilchena MLA Dallas Brodie facing a recall campaign approved by Elections BC this week. There has never been a successful recall of an MLA in BC's history. However, could that change? Do the dynamics look different here? Voters who didn't elect a OneBC leader who 18 months into her term as an MLA might be thinking about taking her out of office? I don't know. Let's go around and just start with recall campaign. Is there any hope in your mind that this is maybe the first in BC's history? And what should we be watching for here? Jillian, why don't we start with you?
Well, yeah, I mean, the threshold is super high. That's why there's never been a successful one. They will need about 15,000 people in a riding where only, I think, 22,000 people voted for this to be successful. However, at the beginning of the year, both Angelo and I predicted that there could be a successful recall campaign in this case because it's such a unique situation. Not only has Brodie been raising all kinds of wild issues that nobody voted for, that she didn't campaign on, but she hasn't been present in her riding. In fact, just this week, she posted a photo showing that she finally got her constituency office, and there's been suggestions that it's not even in the riding. Just so absurd, given that every single other MLA for many all the whole time that I've worked in politics has been able to get this done in a matter of weeks. For her to take almost 2 years just shows how little she's been focused on her constituents and how she hasn't been fulfilling the terms of her job. So I think it could happen. I think sometimes people really are excited about something like this to rally around. So it's going to be super, super interesting to see where it goes.
Feels like, Jeff, this would need to be a really well-organized kind of campaign in order to reach that threshold that Jillian mentioned, which is 40% of all eligible voters, not just the ones that show up, but all eligible voters in the last election. And if they succeed by July the 21st, I believe, July the 20th, then there'd be a by-election in there. Do you think this has any hope?
It's going to be a tough hill to climb, but if they were to name the recall legislation in BC, they ought to call it the Dallas Brodie Act, because there's been no one more deserving of being recalled than her. And I'm not even going to focus on the silly things that she says. It's less about that and more about her lack of respect for her constituents. The fact that she was elected by them to represent them and not to wage personal ideological battles that she's been waging. Folks in Quilchena are focused on issues like everyone in BC, like affordability and housing and public safety, healthcare, and the economy. But instead, she spent all of her time generating controversy around issues that were never front and center. She's just opened her constituency office. She hasn't done the basic work of an MLA. If you don't do the job, you shouldn't. If you don't do the work, you shouldn't have the job. And I think that's why this recall effort will have traction. Will it get 15,000 votes? Hard road to hoe, but I think this will be a interesting one, and they've got a chance.
Angelo, you were the campaign director in the last election, so you saw ridings like this. You kind of know where voters are at. Do you think Vancouver Quilchena is a winnable recall riding for the first time in BC's history, or what do you make of that?
Well, it's certainly a high bar, right? 40%, 15,000 people is difficult. It's especially difficult within the allotted time, right? If you had a year to do it, you probably almost certainly can, but this is like 60 or 90 days. It is difficult. You need to be very organized. But the blueprint of Vancouver Quilchena is really fundamentally a business conservative, business liberal riding. It's an affluent riding. It's a lot of single detached homes, which is ideal for petitioning. It's also where the Musqueam are located and the reservation. And I have to imagine that, whoever these organizers are, and I'll get to that in a minute, they would probably start there on the reservation, because I imagine they would have success. I think one of the issues with the recall campaign is that we don't know who's doing it. All we know is really the financial agent is connected to Mike Starchuk's mayoral campaign in Surrey, and that's where they're registered. Beyond that, there's no face to it. So really what I think is important when you do these recall campaigns is to have a face to it, to do even a press conference in front of the constip office, if there is one, to say, here's what we're doing, here's why we're doing it. I think that's been fumbled a little bit, but maybe there's an organized, well-oiled machine behind it. I'll only note the only precedent for this, and it's sort of a precedent, is in 1998, I believe, there's a BC Liberal MLA from Parksville Qualicum that was recalled, but then resigned before it took actual effect. And I think it was over writing to an editor anonymously. It was like again, you could tell how far politics has come, that things that were just completely anathema 20, 30 years ago are not even mildly controversial now. So it'll be interesting to watch.
Now people are using Nazi slogans in the legislature and almost refusing to apologize. Those were simpler times in the 90s, when faking a name in a letter to the editor of the newspaper almost cost you your riding.
Remember what the headline was? I remember what the headline, it was like, MLA is a liar and we can prove it.
That's a good headline. That is a good headline. Yeah. That was a good work by the local newspaper on that one. Jeff, Angelo brought up a good point there, which is we don't know who these recall folks are. They issued a press release, which was fascinating to me, that basically kind of said, this is a broad, cross-partisan campaign. There's no single spokesperson. Media inquiries may be submitted by email and responses will be provided in writing only at the discretion of the campaign. No spokesperson, no one on camera, no press event, no community leaders, and a refusal to identify who is behind this. What do you think Dallas Brodie does with something like that? And is that a mistake by the recall organizers to launch out the gate that way?
I think the recall folks are well-intentioned, but their launch has been very spotty. They would have been much better served to present a united front of community leaders who were disappointed that they thought that they had elected a conservative MLA, and instead they got a far-right extremist. And I think that would have done better than kind of an announcement by Elections BC on Twitter that the campaign was on. Now, speaking of recalls, I recall when Dallas Brodie was a rising BC conservative star, and I found a leaflet of hers. Found a leaflet. I just want to read a little bit of it to you today, because perhaps this will be the case she's making to voters in this recall campaign. As the next MLA for Vancouver Quilchena, Dallas will bring a fresh perspective to the legislature, grounded in a rich tapestry of experiences in law, broadcasting, and community service. Her dedication to justice, her commitment to conservative values, and deep roots will make her a compelling choice to represent the interests and aspirations of this vibrant constituency. A rich tapestry of experiences. Sure, we've got a rich tapestry of experiences from her since she became MLA, and it might be time to show her the door.
Yeah, Jillian, that's an interesting line that Jeff's reading there, because nowhere in there is I want to ban pride flags from public buildings, or go after trans people in sports, or like the anti-Indigenous kick that she has been on now for quite a while, claiming that the reconciliation industry is out to get her. She didn't sell any of that to voters. That has come afterwards. Do you think that will matter in the recall campaign, or will people go back and do what Jeff just did and kind of like compare what they voted for to what they have?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely the most compelling reason to recall her, is that, there's just no trust there between the person that's supposed to be the representative and the voters. She's been doing other, I mean, that's just a short list of the other things she's been doing. Also spending lots of taxpayer money on inflammatory documentaries, flying up to the ostrich farm to defend the ostriches, despite them being afflicted with bird flu. The list goes on. So I think absolutely, I think you're right, though. I think that there needs to be a counterbalance of community, people from the community, to show that face of what trust would look like instead. This kind of like, most people are not super political. I think it does take a lot to get people involved in a cause. And I think that you need to have some visibility of people who are involved in the campaign in order for people to sort of start jumping on the bandwagon and get involved and have that groundswell of support in the riding. Otherwise, I think, it'll be easy to just let it expire.
I think it'll be easy for her to paint this as, a kind of picking on her again campaign. If the recall organizers don't identify themselves, she will be out there with her cell phone camera and her organizers videotaping everyone in front of the Safeway with a clipboard saying, hey, identify this person. They volunteered in Kevin Falcon's campaign 20 years ago. Everyone's out to get, it will not take long with a secretive recall campaign for her to turn that into, I think, a kind of conspiracy theory of people out to get her. So I don't understand the strategy of this recall campaign at all, but you've all raised great points on how it could have been done better. Okay, let's take a break here. I want to come back. When we're back from the break, we're going to talk about the BC Nurses Union having a strike vote coming up after this. Well, welcome back. The BC Nurses Union announcing the results of their strike vote this week. 98.2% of their 50,000 members voting in favor of a strike, the largest mandate in the union's history for a strike. The question now is, what does the union do? There's no immediate strike, but there could be job action. Negotiations have started again. I want to go around. Angelo, I'll start with you on this one. Can the government afford to allow the nurses to go on strike, given the state of the healthcare system? And do you think it looks like the nurses have a lot of leverage in this position that they're in right now?
The nurses have all the leverage. Let's be clear. There is probably no harder job in this province right now than being a nurse, and it's not what it used to be. Nurses now tell us that they deal with a lot more violence. They deal with a lot more conflict. They deal with a lot more funding issues in their hospitals. It's an incredibly difficult job. So no, the government can absolutely not afford to lose their nurses. And by the way, 911 operators are also involved in this. They also voted to take action. So we have a very serious problem when we're running the worst deficit in history under the NDP. And the reality is we need to actually be funding our healthcare more, but the NDP doesn't have the room to do it. So, my sincere hope is that they find a solution to this, because 98% is a brutal number for nurses to vote in favor, and 95% from 911 operators is also brutal.
Jillian, I think the strategy is from the nurses that the government's just going to cave here. It caved to the BCGEU. It has caved, throughout negotiations in this round, that they just show a position of strength for the reasons Angelo just outlined, and then Premier Eby and his cabinet open up the treasury and dig into the imaginary source of money that is the growing deficit, and off we go. What do you think of that underlying strategy?
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, I also think that the vote indicates just how significant burnout is in that profession. There's also a ton of vacancies, over 7,000 vacancies in nursing. It's really, really hard to attract new people to a really, really tough job. So I think it's, not just a strategy. I think it's legitimate. But at the same time, I think that's a fair assessment of where the government is going to go. It almost makes me wonder if they left the nurses negotiation to last because they knew that they were going to be the most sympathetic union to the public, and it's the one that's going to really be the hardest on us financially. But I think that there is the political will to do what it takes to keep nurses on board and keep them in the profession.
Mm-hmm. Jeff, flip it around. I mean, the BCTF already has a deal. It's usually the hardest union to negotiate with. Doctors have a tentative agreement. The government has come to agreements. It required a lot more spending than it originally planned for, but it does find a way to get there. And it also likes to make the argument it has limited funds, even though I haven't seen any evidence of that in the bargaining. Do you think they can get a deal here? And is there a track record of this plan becoming a deal for other unions that maybe the nurses will sign on?
Well, I think that Angelo's right that the nurses have all the leverage here, and that the 98.2% strike vote is striking, and so is the turnout. 50,000 to 55,000 nurses voted. You can't get 50 of 55,000 people to BC Place if you're offering free beer and hot dogs. People have lives. It's hard to get that, and I think nurses are doing this reluctantly. I don't think that there is the kind of strategizing around, how do we get the absolute most out of government? I think it's, we are working our tails off. Healthcare is in a real spot. We're the ones who are holding things up. We're getting attacked in the workplace. We're working harder than we ever have to try and keep this all together. And we need decent wages. We need decent benefits, and we need a health and safety system in the hospital that supports not just keeping workers safe and going, but better patient care at the end of this. And this is a reluctant strike, I think, strike vote from nurses, because they're the ones who want to, more than anyone, keep patient care going, to keep healthcare there for people who need it. And so for them to come up with this kind of strike vote is a wake-up call to government to strike a good deal with them. And I'm glad they're back at the bargaining table and talking about doing just that. Yeah,
there is bargaining ongoing right now. So I think the hope is that it doesn't actually get to that job action point, but we shall see. We'll take another break, come back with our final topic this week involving some infighting in the BC Conservative leadership race, coming up after this. Well, welcome back. Some pointed words from BC Conservative leadership candidate Kerry-Lynne Findlay over the last week, accusing her rival Peter Milobar of being in a conflict of interest and an untenable position if he was to become leader, because his wife is Indigenous and a member of the Tk'emlúps First Nation. That comment sparked a whole bunch of discussion and reaction throughout the week, which we're going to get into. But before we do that, Angelo, as the executive director of the Conservatives, just bring us up to speed here. Where are we at on the race and the numbers? And we're getting close to May the 30th. What's the situation right now?
Members of the party have 5 days left to verify their identity. It's a very rigorous process. We believe it to be the most secure process we've seen in the province in some time. So we're just shy of 20,000 members now who have gone through the process. After that, voting begins May 23rd. It closes May 29th. And then on the 30th, we announce the results of the new leadership. So we are sort of coming at the tail end of this competition, and it's undoubtedly very lively.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, these comments were in the last leadership debate, Jillian, and everyone's been talking about them throughout the week, because the argument here that if you have an Indigenous family member, you stand to profit in some way from Indigenous policy, therefore you can't be involved in talking about it. To me, it falls down the minute you start poking at it, but it has been an active debate all week. What do you think of this argument?
I think it's absurd. I mean, MLAs have to vote on things all the time that can affect them personally, things like taxes, things like having to do with being a property owner. I think that it was disturbing to see, but it also makes sense. The closer we get to the vote, this is the final debate, voting's about to open, the fissures that have sort of been underlying the race and underlying the Conservative Party are starting to show. And it raises sort of the fundamental question facing the party all along is can this coalition hold without individual MLAs, deciding that a line has been crossed and they just can't stomach staying with the party anymore. I think it raises a lot of questions about what happens after the race, depending on who becomes leader, kind of on all sides. So I think this is one of the most significant moments in their race. And, there's no easy answers on where the party goes from here after, people have taken such diverse positions on something like this.
Jeff, what did you think of the argument raised here and then Milobar's defense and how it kind of played out?
Well, we know Kerry-Lynne Findlay's not going after Peter Milobar's voters as a second choice. Holy hell, that was gross. What Kerry-Lynne Findlay did should be hands-off families. My dad was a provincial legislator in Ontario, and I remember when cars would speed up to our house and folks would get out and whip eggs and apples at our house. And I'm a little kid and I'm frightened like I've never been and wondering why these people are doing this. And in this case, they're not hurling eggs, they're hurling insults on issues that are core to Milobar's family and their identity, and on issues that are really live and volatile right now around Indigenous relations. So I hope that folks who are voting in this leadership race take this into account as they're choosing who they want their next leader to be. Good on Milobar for responding. He responded in the debate in real time. It was a little odd that he went after Ian Black, who defended him in a follow-up communication instead of Kerry-Lynne Findlay. But all in all, I think he's responded appropriately to something really ugly that is gross and should never have been done.
And just to be clear, and a credit to Vaughn Palmer here, my colleague, for going back 30 years to find the sort of precedent ruling here from the conflict commissioner, Ted Hughes. It is not a conflict for a person's spouse to have a job as an MLA voting on that position. It is a conflict if the decision would provide a very specific and individualized benefit to that person, a contract or something like that. So David Eby's wife is a doctor. He is, making healthcare policies. People's spouses are teachers, and so on. And so in this case, the idea that because your spouse is of a certain ethnicity or race, you can't comment on that would then leave all the Indigenous MLAs unable to talk about Indigenous policy issues. And the only people left would be 71-year-old white lawyers like Kerry-Lynne Findlay to set Indigenous policy, which doesn't make a lot of sense. So the minute you start down this path of this argument, it just crumbles around you. But the whole week, people have been seized with debating this, and no surprise, back to the Dallas Brodie, it was the OneBC crew that is mostly of the mind that Peter Milobar is in an irreconcilable conflict and should resign immediately or something like that. But a weird low point in the BC Conservative leadership race. Okay, we're out of time. We have some podcast extras coming up on the audio podcast. Make sure you subscribe to that if you're watching us on TV or on YouTube. Thank you to the panel for being here. Thank you for watching. We'll be back next week with all the latest in BC politics here on Political Capital. Political Capital is brought to you by Uber Canada. Learn how Uber and Mad Canada are reducing impaired driving at uber.com/homesoon.